Fire care, herbs for lungs and trauma. We want to make sure we go through the agenda so you know what to expect from us today. What does it mean to be a helper and a healer? What that person is someone that feels obligated and desires to support people in times of need. And if you're a helper, healer, herbalist, mutual aid supporter, this is a really important way to help yourself and to help others. So thank you so much for being here. How herbs can help in times of crisis, air purifying methods, that's really essential. Jim and I agree that primarily try to breathe clean air. That's number one, right? So we'll give you a little bit of tools in order to have that be your first protective, and then how herbs can help as a secondary protective measure. Products available to buy easily, we talked about that. And then how all of these herbs, what these terms mean, what the definition of all of them are, and what's the most commonly found herbs that you can find that will support you in this time. First, what tools do you have that can help with air quality and breathing? Number one is an N95 mask. 95 means particulate. It's the amount of particulates can get through that mask. And smoke has very, very tiny particulate matter. And it gets into our lungs and into our bloodstream pretty quickly. So your first line of defense is a mask. If you have access to a HEPA filter, that is really important for your indoor air quality. You want to make sure to have that running at all times if you're in times of smoky air. There's also some pretty cool DIY air filters that even the Environmental Protection Agency has put slides together. So I have the slides for you. So these are the links you can send out, you can build yourself how to make your own air filter, especially in times of crisis when people are being displaced. Getting a box fan and getting a MERV 13 air filter and taping it to the box fan, just so the air is being circulated and filtered. I actually built one of these when I was redoing my store in San Francisco when I was resanding my floor. And I used one of these to circulate and filter the air because I couldn't afford one of those big ones or even rent a big one. Utilize this, get a few of them if you can. This is a link from the EPA that is in your resources for the slides. You can also go to the EPA to find this infographic and use it for yourself and for others. Oops. There we go. This is a more advanced one, meaning it includes a cardboard box or 4 filters. So feel free to look at the different levels of air quality. If you are in right now, if you're in LA and working in mutual aid or working in as a first responder, making sure you're having some high quality ones as much as possible, or building some of these as much as you can in spaces. When the Tubbs fire was happening in Sonoma County and the Red Cross Center was there, it was open to the outside. It was very hard to get a lot of air filtration happening since the smoke was everywhere. So I know it's not an ideal situation for everyone. That's when the masks need to be worn indoors and outdoors if you're having to have those windows open at different times. Oops. All right. I am going to be going pretty quickly because we want to get deeper into each herb. So again, if you have any questions about anything we go over, you can ask them at the end. During times of crisis, there are actually products available at corner stores, at everyday grocery stores. You do not have to go to a specialty herbal apothecary to find some things. Walgreens, CVS, sometimes liquor stores have some of these products. Throat coat, it has slippery elm in it. We will talk about why demulcents are really important, but soothing, nourishing, getting that tissue supported is that first line of defense for smoky air and how it irritates tissue and gets into our body. I actually really love Bengal spice, celestial seasonings. It's one of my favorites. It has cinnamon in it, and cinnamon is a natural demulcent. It's gooey, but cinnamon also regulates blood sugar, which is fantastic. You would have to do a lot of it to get that to regulate blood sugar. It's a dosage thing on cinnamon, but it's a nourishing flavor. People love the flavor of chai. It's a really good, delicious tea, and it's readily available at Safeway, at Vons, at a lot of stores that don't carry natural products. So think about those types of products that you can get easily when you're looking for stuff. Honey. Honey is actually one of the demulcents that you can use all the time. It's soothing, it's delicious, it's sweet, it's also very cooling and nourishing for the body. It's that protective gooey layer that we want right now during times of smoky, smoky air. That is that first line of defense herbally. Lozenges are really good, keeping that throat moistened, especially if they're honey sweetened. Sometimes a lot of these herbs in there are going to also help a little bit aromatics and open up those lungs. We'll talk later about that. But making sure lozenges are available for folks too. This is also, if you're in times of crisis and stress, sweet makes you feel good. So use the sweet that's going to really help you in this time to protect those mucous membranes. That's inside the mouth. Those are the sinuses. That's the lungs. These are mucous membranes. They need mucus to protect themselves. And so that's what demulcents are really supportive of. I'm adding chamomile and peppermint tea here, specifically the generic brands that you can find, because often what I've seen is sometimes you can find a generic chamomile and peppermint tea at a gas station, at a corner store, where you use those herbs. Those are herbs, those are herbal medicines. Use 5 tea bags in a tea, in a steam, in a bath. If you're looking to need herbs when you have a hard time finding them or even ordering them online. I'm sure right now shipping isn't happening in LA. I'm sure there's a lot of stopping of typical commerce. And so it is using whatever you can find. Great. All right. So this is the time to do what? Nourish your body, number one. Making sure you're eating as healthy as possible or as nourished as possible that you can. Rest is really important during times of crisis and stress. Sleep is always the first thing to go. And we want to make sure you're resting. Even if you're not sleeping, you're resting. Drink a lot of water. Hydration is really important during times of fires, as well as more specifically when there's smoke in the air. So feel free to offer water to folks, put honey in that water if you need to help people drink more of it. Getting water in your body is really important. And then connect with your community. This is also part of your community. So looking for people here, connecting deeper, we'll have time for that. Great. And then prioritize clean air. This is again going back to cleaning your air, being in clean air spaces as much as possible is your priority. And then the last one is a lot of the misinformation I've been seeing online these days is about detoxing right now. This is not the time to detox, not until you're out of the smoke, not until you're out of the crisis. This is not the time to detox. It is the time to nourish your body and support your system. And later, when the smoke is cleared, when the air is cleared, when you have vitality enough, when you're sleeping better, you can go through the detox process. Now, of course, if you have really congested lungs and you need to clear those, that's expectoration. That's not necessarily detoxification. So I just want to be really clear, as an herbalist, I do not recommend detoxing right now. Now, I'm going to go through some terms that some of you might have heard before, but I want to make sure you know what they mean so you know if an herb is in a category, how to utilize it for yourself or for your community. Adaptogens. What does that mean? Great question. Adaptogens help your body manage stress, help the body adapt to stress. That's where adaptogens are. But it actually does it on a cellular level. It does it through cortisol and managing cortisol, and that's the stress hormone. So it's really good when you're in time of crisis and afterwards when you're rebuilding your body after a time of extreme stress. Now, according to Donald Yance, who wrote Medical Adaptogens and Medical Herbalism, which there is a resource link at the end of the slides, he separates them between primary adaptogens, secondary, and adaptogen companions or tertiary. So I put them here as what are the primary adaptogens, the one that actually go in and really support that cortisol management, that cortisol mitigation, even metabolism, reducing it as quickly as possible. American ginseng is a lovely adaptogen, really supportive for actually cooling the lungs also, which is why I chose it here. Ashwagandha, which a lot of people know. It's pretty popular these days. It's actually more of a calming adaptogen. It helps with sleep. It helps rebuild your essence as you're sleeping and resting. It's not an energizing adaptogen. So that one's more for calming. And I really like eleuthero, which another name is Siberian ginseng. It's not a true ginseng, so they changed the name to a shortened version of its botanical name, Eleutherococcus senticosus. Eleuthero is a really great neutral adaptogen, helps with the immune system, helps manage that stress load. The other herbs that I know Jim is going to go into a little bit deeper later, shatavari, which is known as Ayurvedic ginseng or women's ginseng, and that one's a really lovely secondary adaptogen. Tulsi or holy basil is a lovely, delicious adaptogen. And a tertiary adaptogen or an adaptogen companion is hawthorn because it's so high in polyphenols as well as antioxidants. It's actually considered really restorative for the body and as a tertiary adaptogen. Nervines, a little different than adaptogens. Some adaptogens can act like nervines, but they're not technically nervines on their own. Nervines help calm the nervous system, often increasing GABA in the brain, which helps calm down that anxiety or that stress behavioral, ruminating thinking. Herbs to calm you down, to relax you. Chamomile, we love chamomile. It's one of our faves. Passion flower, really beautiful, really profoundly helpful herb. Leaf and flower you can use in the vine as well. Milky oats or oat seed. That's the aerial parts of the seed parts, and we'll go over that later. And hops. I love the botanical name of hops. Humulus lupulus. Now, if you're not a beer drinker, and a lot of people aren't drinking beer and alcohol these days, which is great, there's actually hop water, which I love, that has all of the benefits of hops, calms you down, but also doesn't have the alcohol in it. And it's a really helpful nervine that's common now at natural food stores or in different specialty shops. We're almost done with the categories here, and then we're going to keep going. Demulcents. This is really like Jim's area of expertise is demulcents. He gave a class at Scarlet Sage many moons ago on hacking and lungs. So goo, demulcents are things with goo. So demulcents, if you made a tea of a demulcent, it would actually be filmy. These are long chain polysaccharides or things that have these yummy, gooey things, right? Actually, marshmallow root was the original marshmallow. They used marshmallow root to create marshmallows for, I believe it was when people were bootlegging gin in the medieval times in Europe. They were getting ulcers, and they actually made marshmallow candies to heal their ulcers. And that's where marshmallow came from now. Now we don't have marshmallows with marshmallow in it anymore, but you can still make it. So demulcents are goo. They are going to soothe and nourish those mucous membranes. Aromatics. These are herbs that have strong smell. That's what aromatic means. So essential oils come from those leaves and flowers that are really strong and smelling, and we can extract them through distillation. So herbal aromatics generally have high essential oils in them. Some that smell strong do have chemicals that are aromatics, but not necessarily the essential oils. So here we have peppermint, cinnamon, tulsi, sage, rosemary, thyme. The list goes on and on. But the ones that are most common to use sometimes are culinary spices. So remember, your kitchen spices actually have a lot of medicinal properties. You can use some of those in this time. Now, one very strong distinction I want to make is the difference between lung relaxants and tonics and lung expectorants. The lungs are a very, very sensitive organ. They like stimulation, they like relaxation, they need to be nourished. They are our breath of life. It's really important to know when to use certain herbs and when not to use certain herbs. If you're in the middle of smoky air, you want to use lung tonics and relaxants. And these can help calm down a spasm, right? When someone has a dry cough and they cough and cough and cough all the time, these are going to help calm that down. So mullein is not a demulcent. Some people say it is. It's definitely not. It is a tonic. It's really supportive for helping breathing during times of smoky air, but also it's a neutral. People with asthma love mullein. They even smoke mullein. Mullein is a very long use herb, and it's really important to know when to use it. Wild cherry bark is considered a relaxant and a tonic. And in very low doses, lobelia is really important for as an antispasmodic. Only use it if you know exactly how to use it. If you overuse it, the side effect, it's an emetic and it'll make you throw up. So if you start feeling nauseous and you're using lobelia, it's because you've used too much. It is a very low dose botanical. I put it here because it's a common herb that people talk about when someone's quitting smoking. And it has a very similar molecular structure to nicotine. Lobelian is very similar to nicotine. So people use it a lot. So use it carefully, but it's an important herb to know how to use and make sure you understand the dose. And then the lung expectorants, they expel. Mucus is in the lungs, I want to get it out, you expel mucus. Elecampane. Isn't it interesting? Wild cherry bark is on the expectorant and the relaxant. It actually has both properties. What's so amazing about herbs is that they have hundreds, if not thousands, of chemical constituents. Some do both of things. They want to tone and cool. They want to nourish and dry out. There's these fascinating things that these herbs can do. And wild cherry bark is an interesting lung herb that it's used for dry and wet coughs. I would probably add a very specific expectorant or lung tonic to that if you want to dry out one or nourish one. Using lung expectorants are not encouraged at this time because they do open the lungs up for clean air to get in, not smoky air. So until you're in clean air, please hold off on expectorants. Now, how do we use those chamomile tea bags? Jim and I both love using chamomile tea bags to cleaning the eyes. So when you are working out there in the smoky air, you're walking, you're not generally wearing goggles, right? Eyes are getting irritated from the smoke. One of the things that I've used for many, many first aid remedies, including a sty in the eye or a piece of something in the eye, is chamomile tea bags. So how you use it, put a chamomile tea bag in a cup of water, just like you would make any tea bags, tea. Steep it for 5 minutes. Take the tea bag out and let it cool down. I promise you do not want to put a boiling hot tea bag on your eye. Once it's cool, meaning you can touch it with your hand, you can put that tea bag that's already been steeped on your eye as a poultice. And putting it on your eye, you can lie down, let someone rest, and you can have them drink that chamomile tea to calm down. Now, what that also does is gives you the tea that once it's cool, you can use as an eye wash. And I believe Jim has an eye wash remedy for chamomile tea that he would like to share.
Yeah, I really love, I mean, in general, if I think about eye washes, if something is strongly aromatic, it might be a little bit stingy in your eye. So, like, I don't want to put, I mean, I certainly don't want to put, although it's a tradition, cayenne in my eye, personally. I don't want to put thyme in my eye. Peppermint in my eye also makes me feel like that. So, I think about aromatic herbs. I think, like, not a whole lot, but chamomile is really perfect because it's gently aromatic. It's quite aromatic, but it's gentle in its nature. And what I often do is make a tea that's like maybe chamomile and plantain together. And then I can make the tea. So if you're using tea bags, of course, Laura already mentioned, it should be steaming, definitely not bubbling, definitely not steaming before, just test it before you put it on your eye. But also, like, if it's tea bag, does have a staple in it, you might want to take that out. Um, you can use the tea bag as a poultice. You can put a washcloth or a cotton ball in your tea and use it as a poultice or a compress. You can, if you need to rinse something out of your eye, and you have a dropper or even like just a small measuring cup or something, you can use it as a rinse. Um, and not many people, very few people have eye cups, Even a lot of herbalists I know don't have eye cups, but a lot of people do have swimming goggles. And so one thing you can do if your eyes are really irritated is pour some into, one or both of the swimming goggles. Um, put it on your face. You have to put your head down and, put the goggles on your face and strap it on, and then just like let that tea kind of sit in your eye. Now, when you make tea, you're going to put it onto your eyeball. It's a good idea to strain it through a coffee filter. If you had like bulk herbs, chamomile has lots of little chamomile pieces in it that'll go through a wire strainer. So a coffee filter is really important to use. Um, and then also, if for every, 8 fluid ounces, every cup of tea, you can add about a quarter teaspoon of salt. That'll make it a saline or an isotonic solution, and it'll just feel a little bit better on your eyes. It won't feel like you're getting water on your eyes. If you put too much salt on, it'll sting, so don't do that. But the goggle trick is really helpful because sometimes you want that prolonged contact with your eyes if your eyes are really irritated. If you had smoke in them for a long period of time because you've been out and you're blinking and you're basically just rubbing the smoke particles around in your iris, on your eyeballs, that the ability to have the goggles holding that tea in place and soothing your eyes can really be very helpful. The video that I have on YouTube that's linked to in this goes through a long process of different options and different ways that you can make that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, I actually have found that this is one of the easiest things for people to do right away. They often have chamomile in their cupboard, or if they're staying at a friend's house, their friend might have chamomile in their cupboard. It's a pretty common, I mean, Trader Joe sells chamomile tea. So it is one of those herbs that's the most easily available. Another use for chamomile before we move on, because I'm so excited to hear what Jim has to say about marshmallow root, is that some people have been asking about babies and the use of herbs for infants or babies at this time. Chamomile is an amazing herb for children. You can make a strong tea, 3 to 5 tea bags, let it steep for 10-15 minutes, put that in a bath and let that cool down and put them in that bath. It's going to calm them down. They're going to smell it. Those very, very light essential oils that chamomile has, it has essential oils. That's why it smells so good, are going to help calm and nourish, but it's safe for the baby. It's safe for any children of any age. I believe Matthew Wood says chamomile is good for any child of any age. So if you're feeling irritated, if you're feeling stressed out, if you're feeling overwhelmed, use this for yourself. Use it as a wash, drink it, use it as an eye wash, but also put it in a steam if you need it, and that will help calm you down as well. So this is the only herb that I would recommend for anyone under 2. If I don't know what's really going on with them specifically and treating them one-on-one, it's a really good herb for babies. So if they're irritated, they have colic, they're not sleeping, they're, feeling the stress of the family and things around them, use chamomile. Great. Now, one of the key happies of the world of demulcents is marshmallow. Jim has a wonderful recipe. This is the basics for a cold infusion. Now, marshmallow root has long polysaccharides, so it makes it really gooey, right? And so you actually want to infuse it in cold water. Hot water can break those molecular structures, so it actually makes it less gooey. We want to keep those together. And so you put cold infusion, meaning 2 tablespoons per cup of water. Obviously, increase that when you make a quart. And you're going to steep that overnight, and then you can strain it. I'm using bulk marshmallow root at this point, but there are a few companies that do marshmallow tea bags. It's pretty hard to find. So if you can get bulk marshmallow root, it's really important to be able to know how to do a marshmallow cold infusion. Now, this is Jim's recipe. I will have him take over from here.
All right. So, I've got kids and well, my youngest child is 12 now. But when my oldest child was just a kid and people started learning as an herbalist, they'd say things like, they'd ask me questions and all that. And I was like, oh, I've got a really good cocoa recipe. And a basic cocoa recipe, if you want something that has honey but not sugar in it, is like a quart of water, about a third cup of unsweetened cocoa powder. You have to get good unsweetened cocoa powder. If you make it with Hershey's unsweetened cocoa powder, it will be as disappointing as all Hershey's chocolate. Sorry if I've wrecked our chances for a Hershey's discount. And then like a fourth to a third cup of honey. And in this situation, I would use more honey because the honey is also acting as a moistening part of the preparation. So even though you might think like, oh, it's sugar, it's sweet, I want to cut back on that, when we're using it and we're adding it for a medicinal use, that makes sense. And then you just put that in water and you heat it up just to sipping temperature. Um, and it's pretty amazing. But then I started playing off of that and I was like, well, if I want to tweak it in different directions, I could add stuff not just for flavor, but if someone has a dry cough, or in this situation, if they're inhaling a lot of smoke, which is drying out their lungs because the very dry smoke is coming into contact with their lung tissue and sucking the moisture out of their lung tissue and into the smoke and sticking there like a film. You can make a cold infusion of marshmallow rather than just using straight water, and you have moistening demulcent cocoa. And I know some people might think like, oh, marshmallow infusion gets pretty thick and super gooey, but because you're consuming it at a warmer temperature, it'll be a little bit thinner, and the flavor works. Um, Parents would tell me like, I'm so glad like you do all this stuff for your kids. I was like, I made this cocoa recipe for me. That was like totally, I made it before I had kids. That's because I wanted cocoa. And then I started tweaking it. If we're in a situation where someone's sick, we can add elderberry syrup to it, some propolis tincture. There's all kinds of directions you can take it. But a lot of times, maybe you're dealing with someone who, although this sounds silly to me to say because I'm an herbalist, they say like, I don't like tea. I don't want to drink tea. This tastes weird. It's unfamiliar. And familiarity is really important because if, a lot of people who are not into herbs are affected by wildfire smoke. Anyone in the area is affected by wildfire smoke. And we might be asking them to do something and mentioning herbs that they've never heard of. And that can create some apprehension. And if you say, oh, marshmallow, everyone's heard of that. Cocoa, everyone's heard of that. Most people like cocoa. And if they don't like cocoa, I'm sure, although I haven't made it yet, you could make like a carob buzz, you know? No, it's not really fair to carob to make it a cocoa substitute, but this is a really nice formula. It can be really helpful for children or people who aren't into teas or aren't into unfamiliar things. It's just familiar and comforting. And chocolate, it increases endorphins. It can make people like kind of feel a little bit up in a time when things are very hard.
Thank you so much for that. I was thinking too that a chai with honey and marshmallow might be a good option too for folks that don't like chocolate. I know every now and then, which surprises me as well, someone doesn't like chocolate, but it seems like chai is a good alternative that will still, support folks. Great. Thank you so much for that. I can't wait to try it. All you, Jim.
Oh, it's all on me. It's my turn. Yay, woohoo. Um, Plantain, the first thing to say, we're talking about the common weed plantain and not the thing that if you don't look at close enough, it looks like a banana. That is not the plantain we're talking about. That other plantain, the fruit, is wonderful, but it's not what we're talking about right now. Plantain is a very common weed. It grows throughout a lot of North America. It is something that thrives on and it's hard to say this, but it sort of thrives on environmental damage. When people disturb the ground and they walk on it too much time and they compact the soil, that is the kind of habitat that plantain really likes. So it's very commonly available. A lot of people, when I initially show them what it is, their first thought is like, oh, that grows right outside my door. And the herbs that grow right outside your door are the most important herbs to sort of learn about and know about. If you know about really amazing, super cool herbs that do really amazing, super cool things, and they don't grow anywhere near you, those plants are still really cool and amazing, but they're less accessible. And one of the great things about plantain is it's not only accessible, but it's super sustainable to gather. You pick the leaves, new leaves grow back. You can keep picking it all throughout the year. It doesn't need to be gathered at a particular time of the year. So anywhere between the time that the leaves come out well, I live in Michigan. So in the springtime until the fall, you can use them. There's not like a season that it is like, oh, you have to get it in this season. If you live in a place where there's not a winter that makes it kind of die back, then it's available more often. It is commonly available in commerce as a dried herb. So if you have access to that, that's pretty wonderful too. And for me, this is like a great base herb to making a tea, maybe a tincture blend that you're going to use for dealing with the complications of smoke inhalation. Because it's a little bit demulcent, it's a little bit astringent, and it has this drawing actions. One of the things that it's most commonly and most popularly known for is as something you would put on a bug bite or a bee sting to sort of like presumably somehow sort of like pull the venom out of you and make everything, less problematic. But it can also help to sort of, and I admittedly will struggle with explaining the physiology of this. It helps to loosen and pull out stuck mucus. And that is often a part of what is happening is when we inhale a lot of smoke, it lands on our mucus, it thickens it up, and it makes it's stuck there. And so the drawing quality that plantain has helps to release that stuck mucus and allow us to cough it up and get it out of us. So that's a very important aspect of it. To me, this is like a starting place for where I'm going to start dealing with a lot of the respiratory teas or tincture that I make. It's like the first ingredient that I lay down before I put other things on top of it. All right. Um, mullein. So I have to admit, I'm one of the people, I'm going to throw mullein into the demulcent category. Um, and that's okay. So let me just add to a little bit of how I'm going to frame the thought about demulcents. So I think about demulcents as moistening herbs. And then in Western herbalism, almost all of our demulcents, we call them demulcents because they're rich in mucilage, meaning you mix them with water, they get slimy. And if we go into other traditions, we start to see that there's other herbs that in Western herbalism we call demulcents, but they don't really get slimy. And the best example of this is you'd see a list of demulcents in a Western herbal, and licorice is in there. And licorice gets a little bit filmy, but it's not slimy, it's super sweet. So when I think of demulcents, I think moistening herb, and I break them up into kind of two subcategories. There's slimy demulcents and sweet demulcents. And the slimy demulcents, we're going to kind of keep going on. But the sweet demulcents would be like licorice is a great example. Shatavari is a great example. Bland and slightly sweet and a little bit of slime there. The Chinese herb Codonopsis, which I love so much, is a great example of a sweet demulcent. American ginseng is a moistening sweet demulcent as well as being adaptogen. And I think we can even put honey into this category. So when we add honey to our tea, we're not just adding it to make it sweeter or to, quote unquote, taste better. We're adding it because it's acting as a sweet moistening substance. It's not an herb, but a substance that's adding to the moistening quality of the tea that we're drinking. When we're thinking about demulcents, whether they're sweet or whether they're slimy, another thing we think about is the degree to which they are. And with slimy stuff, this is really easy. Slippery elm and marshmallow and Irish moss, or people call it sea moss, even though sea moss means a bunch of different seaweeds. They're really slimy when you mix them with water. They get super gooey. And then if we thought about like violet leaves or sassafras leaves or malva leaves, like a mallow leaf, not a marshmallow leaf, but could be. They're less demulcent, they're less slimy, but they're still slimy. And then once we get into plantain, and then I would say, for my opinion too, mullein, they have mucilage in them, but they also have so much other stuff going on that they're still demulcents, but they're a lot like less in terms of the degree to which they are demulcents. So we want to think about that in a situation where we are thinking about wildfires and dealing with the impact of wildfire smoke. We want to be thinking this is causing a lot of dryness, so I need to have the more overtly higher degree slimy stuff in there. So if I'm using something like plantain, I also want to use something maybe like marshmallow to add more slime to it. Now, one of the things that is really interesting and possibly confusing is that the slimy mucilage that you might associate with marshmallow, or that maybe if you're less familiar with herbs, you might associate with okra. Oh, you know what you can use? Okra. Okra is a demulcent. If you have access to okra, you could make tea out of that. It's really green and it's very okra tasting. If you cook okra and you cut off the thin pointy end and then the little stem end and save those and dry them out, those get pretty goopy. I dehydrate those and save those and add them to things. So if okra is a way that you're familiar with slime, and not some of these other herbs I'm mentioning, that works too. Um, that mucilage, that slimy water-based substance does not actually get into our lungs, right? Because in order for it to get into our lungs, it had to be absorbed through our intestinal wall into our bloodstream. And because our blood is mostly water, it would make our blood all slimy. And that doesn't really happen. So the physiology of how mucilaginous, slimy demulcent herbs moisten lung tissue is kind of not fully known. A lot of herbalists will say, and this is a reasonable thing to say, is there's some kind of reflex reaction, something when we taste and when we consume mucilaginous plants creates a reflex reaction which moistens other mucous membranes in distant places of the body that they don't actually touch. Maybe scientifically it's because we have goo-p receptors, and it stimulates, things via slimy pathways. Um, Maybe it's slime fairies. I don't really know. Reflex reaction kind of works. But it's pretty well established that demulcent herbs don't only work where the mucilage comes into direct contact, which would be your digestive tract, but also in your urinary tract, in your reproductive mucosa, and in your respiratory tissue. And this is well established all throughout the world and all traditions of herbalism. People use demulcent herbs to moisten the lungs and respiratory tissues. Um, why are demulcents so important when we have smoke inhalations? So if you've ever spilled anything, maybe in your garage there's an oil spill or you spill something and you throw some kitty litter on there, that dry kitty litter soaks the moisture up out of the maybe the surface of your concrete, and then it kind of sticks there, right? And so when we inhale all of this smoke, and smoke is always hot and dry because stuff got burned up. All the moisture got burned out of it. It's hot because of fire. And it lands on our lung tissues. It pulls some of the moisture out of our lung tissues, but then it kind of stays stuck on there, right? And sometimes I think about, actually, I started using this analogy a couple years ago. Like, I make oatmeal in the morning, and I look at the pot that I made the oatmeal in, and I think, I'll clean that up later. And then I come back later, and that oatmeal is stuck to the side of the pot. It does not want to let go. And I could really scrub at it and I could kind of like try to do things to force it off. But the best way to get it to release is to add moisture back to it. So it wants to like re-moisten and it'll come off a lot more easily. And this applies to tissues in the lungs too. We use demulcents, they moisten respiratory tissue, and then that mucus will like be able to be removed from the lungs more effectively. So mullein is very mildly demulcent. And when I think of like what does mullein cough sound like? It's kind of like it has that wheezy sound to it. If I hear that, and that's a sound that if someone has really damp lung congestion, you can't make that sound. Um, so that's an indication. If I hear that, I think of mullein. And mullein is also a spectacular respiratory relaxant. So if when people are coughing, their cough sounds like and that hard coughing leaves their chest really, really sore, and it's just hurting. Mullein is spectacular for that. And mullein and plantain, they just go together so well. It's like such a great combination. So they're really nice. One thing I want to address before we move on is that there's a long tradition of taking mullein and smoking it for respiratory issues. That is not going to be appropriate when you're dealing with smoke inhalation, right? When you take an herb and you light it on fire and you inhale the burning embers of that herb, no matter what the qualities or energetics of that, even if it was the most, like if it was watermelon and it's super moistening and super cooling, you lit it on fire, you're inhaling the hot burning embers, it's always hot and dry. And that's going to be aggravating. It might still have an antispasmodic effect, but it's really just not what we need to do. And I know because there's a gazillion melon groups on Facebook and everyone's like, smoke melon, it's the best way to use it. It doesn't make sense to do when we're dealing with wildfire. We don't need to add more ash into our lungs. Okay, next plant. Let's see what's here. Oh, milky oats. Not really quite a demulcent. It is slightly moistening. It's got a starchy quality, and so like if we think about different kinds of traditions in herbalism, and they talk about the sweet flavor, usually sweet, say like in Chinese medicine, it's overtly sweet things and includes slimy things because they've still got polysaccharides and includes sort of like blander, starchy things, and that's where the oat seed would fall in, but very, very mildly and gently moistening. Milky oats is not so much an adaptogen because technically it's not working on the HPA axis, but it is a nervine tonic. It is a nutritive. And when you're using milky oats, and especially if you're using it daily over a prolonged period of time, um, I think the word that I like most for it is that it's sustaining. When a situation is hard and it's going to stay hard for a long time, and you want something that's really going to be supportive, a nervine tonic or a nervine tropho-restorative, that's a big word for a nervine tonic, is going to be really, really helpful. And kind of like when I said earlier, if I'm thinking about a respiratory, tea or tincture blend, I'm going to start with plantain and think what I'm going to add on top of that. When I'm thinking about a tea or tincture blend that I'm going to use for ongoing stress, includes trauma, uh, milky oats is definitely something I'm going to favor and sort of like be a starting place. A couple caveats. One caveat is while oats do not contain gluten, oats do not contain gluten. There may be cross-contamination in processing. So when you see gluten-free oats, that's what they're testing for. I've heard that there may be like, wheat pollen from farming lands on it. I think it would be hard for that to be a true contaminant, but let's just include that as a possibility. But really, it's more of an issue because some people who are sensitive to gluten aren't only sensitive to gluten, they're sensitive to grain proteins. And oats does not have gluten, but it does have a grain protein called avenin in it. And some people may have cross reactivity. That's not the majority of people, but it is some people. So that's something to be mindful of. If we are thinking about like the tea of the dried milky oat tops versus the tincture of the fresh milky oat tops, the tincture of the fresh milky oat tops is less nutritive, but more of a nervine tropho-restorative. And the tea of the dried tops is more of a nutritive and has less of the nervine tropho-restorative action. But it's a really important herb, and it is also gentle outside of the potential of grain proteins being an issue. There is no one that I would not recommend milky oats to. Okay, let's see what's next. It's exciting for me. Hawthorn. Hawthorn is not just a heart tonic for people who have heart failure or hypertension or all of the different physiological heart things. In the reason for its inclusion here is it's a really good herb, and maybe we can call it a nervine. Maybe the word nervine is a little bit too small for what it does. But when I think about people dealing with loss and emotional hardship and grief and sort of that like emotional trauma, that really heartsick trauma of something happening, of being displaced, of maybe losing your home, or maybe just being separated from your home, of worrying about your friends and families. And this is outside of people directly affected by this. There are a lot of people that are very worried about their friends and family on this deep emotional level. And Hawthorn is very soothing to that. And it adds some ease for emotional grief and hardship and trauma. If you're using the berries, you could use tea, you could use tincture, you could make syrups out of it. There's all different kinds of ways you can use the berries. If you are making a tea with it, it's a little bit funky tasting. You know, if you have really good quality hawthorn, there's a little bit of a fecundity to it, you know, or maybe it's slightly rank. The flowers are pollinated by flies, so it's not like the most floral, great tasting tea in the world. Um, but the berries are really pretty wonderful, and can be made in all kinds of different preparations. A lot of times, most of the time, if I'm thinking about something where someone's dealing with a lot of emotional hardship, I'm starting with milky oats and I'm thinking I'm going to add some hawthorn to that. And then there will be, you know, at least one most of the time or a few other herbs that are indicated for the way that that person is responding to that stress, that trauma, that hardship.
I'd love to add something, Jim, if that's okay. I also just want to say if someone does, because hawthorn does reduce blood pressure, and if someone is on blood pressure medication, to be careful about dosage here with hawthorn, we want to do with much smaller doses, much higher doses. We do see blood pressure dropping. So just in case there are some folks that are on meds in this room, or if you're treating people with heart issues, just do your research on dosage with hawthorn. A cup of tea is fine. Just higher doses in tincture or higher doses in larger amounts of tea. Let's say it's a quart of tea. Someone's really excited about it, drinking it every day. Just be aware, work with a clinical herbalist if you're working with someone that has some heart issues with hawthorn.
A lot of books and resources that you'll find online, if you look for contraindications, the main thing that it'll list is if you're taking digitalis, it may require you to adjust your dose of digitalis. I don't actually meet a lot of people taking digitalis-based medicines. And where I've seen some funkiness to it, which where it hasn't really been reported, and some people have been like, that doesn't really happen, is when people like if there's one class of blood pressure medications that this seems to interact with, not all the time at all, and not most of the time, it's beta blockers. And I initially learned that from Alice Ann Carlton. I always props out to that because like I heard about it from her. And then the first time I had someone who was reacting adversely long decades ago, um, to Hawthorne, it was a beta blocker issue. And they tried capsules, they tried teas, they tried tinctures, and it was like they just could not use the two of them together. Um, and although we don't have a slide for it, you know, there are other herbs that are cardiac herbs. One of them that I really love that covers a lot of the same ground and as actually a demulcent. I don't know that it's a heart demulcent. I don't know quite how to wrap my head around the, I have some ideas, but I don't know for like really solidly how to wrap my head around the idea of heart demulcents or cardiovascular demulcents. But it is a demulcent herb. Selenocereus grandiflorus or Cactus grandiflorus is the old Latin name for it you would find in old books. And that herb was also used as a nervine tonic. It was the stems of the night blooming cereus, and there are other species of night blooming cereus, but it was like one of the key indications for it was like intense fear. Like I'm so fearful right now. I'm so fearful about my health. And because it's often framed in the situation of like heart disease, it's like I'm afraid I'm going to die from my heart disease. But I've also used it for situations where people are just really scared about the situation that they're in and think that it can be really pretty wonderful. It's not commonly found in commerce. You have to use the fresh plant. Herb Farm makes cactus tincture, and David Winston's company, Herbalist and Alchemist, makes cactus tincture. Those would be two reliable sources where you know you would be getting the right species and a good preparation. Oh, passion flower. So passion flower is beautiful. It's really weedy and super sustainable. It is a calming herb. And one of the things that passion flower is really spectacular for is like you get into these stuck thought patterns of like your brain just won't stop. And sometimes those brain won't stop thinking is like worry, 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 worry. What if this happens? What if this happens? What if this happens? But it can also be like your brain just won't turn off. And I know in a situation like this, a lot of people are worried, but also a lot of people, they're just stuck in like planning, compensating, coping, figuring out mode. and they can't relax because they're like, I got to figure out what I'm going to do. I got to figure out what I'm going to do. I got to figure out what I'm going to do. I have to figure this change, that change, what's going on. I got like they can't turn off, and when they can't turn off, they can't relax. And even when it seems like, how could I possibly relax? We need to take those opportunities when we can get them. And this can help to slow down the thoughts. There was an herbalist in London named Christopher Headley. He passed away some years ago, but he used to say mice in the brain, right? You know, your brain is just so active and it won't stop. And so you can't sleep because your brain won't turn off. Passion flower is one of the things that I would think of. Passion flower is also really helpful for people who are very emotionally open and empathic, and they're just picking up on just all of the stress and worries and trauma of all the people around them. There's an herbalist in Chicago named Althea Northridge Orr. She has a PDF handout online. We should try to find that for the resources, where she talks about different nervines. And she's the one who first introduced me to this particular use of passion flower, which I had never heard of before. And it really pans out. So for people who are just feeling overwhelmed by their openness and their sensitivity, passion flower can help maybe establish filters, or can help with when you're trying to sort out like what's yours and what you've picked up and is not really yours and you can't do anything about. It can make that process a little bit easier and not something that we get stuck and fixated on. Okay, next herb. What do we got next? Oh, violet. I feel like that about all the plants. Oh, this plant, oh, that plant. So violet is a demulcent herb. It's a slimy demulcent herb. If you're using sweet violet, Viola odorata, it also has some of that sweetness when you're using the flowers that come along with it. A lot of people, when they think about violet, they think about the flowers. The leaves are nutritive. The leaves are slimier than the flower. They have more mucilage in them. And they also have a lot of lymphatic involvement. So I can use violet leaves a lot like I would use plantain or like I would use mullein. But in addition to that, the violet leaves have maybe like a more pronounced lymphatic action. So if I'm working with someone and they have this dry cough that is associated with smoke inhalation and the heat and the irritation from all the particles, we're going to get the moistening action that helps relieve. Yeah. Okay. Um, the violet helps to release all of that, or loosen and allow you to get that smoke out of your lungs. But also, a lot of people, they might have like a lot of inflammation and soreness in the back of their throat because they're inhaling this smoke. It's creating an irritant on their mucosa, and they're talking and coughing. And if we've got a dry cough and our throat is really dry and our tonsils are swollen and our lymph glands are swollen, the violet can be really helpful for addressing both of those things at the same time. I really feel like as much as possible, when we find an herb that does more than one thing that we need all in one herb, rather than one herb for this and another herb for that and another herb for that, the more a single plant does that is appropriate to what our body needs, the more indicated that plant is for what is going on with us. Also, violet's just delicious. It's wonderful to eat. It's wonderful to make tea with. Strongly nutritive. You can make tincture with it, and the tincture will be helpful. I know that a lot of people, when they think about tinctures of demulcent herbs, they'll say like, oh, but alcohol does not extract mucilage very well, and so it's, not going to act as a demulcent. But the mucilage doesn't get to our lungs anyway, and some of the mucilage will come out because if we're extracting fresh plants with water, I'm sorry, if we're extracting fresh plants with alcohol, even very high proof alcohol, it's also extracting the water and the water soluble constituents along with it, and that will get into the tincture. So violet, really wonderful choice, especially when there's sore throats, swollen glands, and inflammation.
I will be sending this information to you. We are so excited that you're here and that you're supporting your community. So thank you for the work you're doing.